Teachers, when did karmic justice finally come to that one troublesome student? I coached middle school football. Some kids have come out of their shell by then. Others have not. But at least most of the early bloomers were jerks to make life hell for everybody. The team's starting halfback was one of those jerks. He gave a defensive lineman hell, and since everybody thought he was cool, they gave him hell right along with him. The D lineman was a big guy but not aggressive or outgoing. Still just in his shell really. He did fine out there because he was a big guy but hardly played to his potential. The little running backs took their Napoleon complexes out on the big guy by running by him and shouting pass every time he failed to stop them. Rather than fight back to make the play, he would just ignore it and line up and try again the next play. One day the whole thing just clicked for the big guy and he started making plays. He learned to get off his blockers and form tackle and attack the ball carrier. It was a cool thing to see. He loved it. When he really started getting into a groove, I started running the jerk halfback right at the blooming D lineman and watched him plant that guy in the ground with a thud every time. It was just getting easier as I made sure they ran the same play at him play after play. Soon, bruised and beaten, the jerk halfback asked, "How many times are you going to run this play?" And I responded, "Once for every time you called him a pass." Last year had a 7-year-old in my class who was just a pain. He's the only child I've ever taught who I've actually disliked. He would throw things around the classroom, pinch other children, stab them with pencils. He was rude to everyone and would always blame it on someone else. Talking to his parents wouldn't help because they believed everything he said. Even over adults who had actually witnessed him doing it. They would give excuses and say that other children were blaming him or that he was being picked on. There was nothing wrong with this child other than he had been brought up with no consequences in his life. Anyway, one break time he was harassing another child and I guess they just had enough, and this usually mild-mannered child just punched him in the stomach, causing the horrible child to wet himself. When following the indecent up, all of the other children who witnessed it, around 5 or 6, completely closed ranks and denied that it ever happened. I can't usually condone when children hit back, it causes so many other problems, but you better believe all the adults that have had to deal with this child were rooting for the hitter. Freshman English. Busted a kid for plagiarism. He was furious and refused to drop the course. I gave him a second chance. And he continued to plagiarize. He was a slimy, smarmy kid who thought I was just a dumb, clueless TA. But joke's on him, he ended up failing the course 3 ways: plagiarizing, exceeding absences, and failing to turn in a complete final. You can argue about 1 way to get an F. You can't argue about 3. I interned in a class with this kid who always thought he was smarter than everyone else. He was pretty smart, but not by too much. He always got paired with kids not as smart as him. So he would always be really smug when dealing with them. We learned he got that from his parents. During a parent-teacher conference, his parents praised that boy up and down and thought he was the smartest kid in the school. They built him up as that and they got him thinking that too. Then they went off on my mentor teacher. She wasn't providing him with higher enough education. She was bringing him down. She was terrible. The conference ended when my mentor teacher left the room crying after the verbal lashing. Well, about a week later, there was an event where parents came to watch their children in class. It was to watch them do math games with other students. Well, my mentor teacher paired this smug little bastard with the actual smartest kid in class. The one who was working on more advanced classes after school. The kid got shamed. His parents were so flustered during the event. They were very visibly nervous and upset looking as this kid got destroyed game after game. They left before it was all done and took him out of school for the rest of the day. Our minister had a brat child. One day he kicked at the minister and the man grabbed the kicking foot and the kid fell on the other leg and broke it. When the minister told the congregation the story, the whole church either laughed or clapped. He did start to parent better after that incident. Teacher's assistant for anatomy. This one student had an ego so large it could barely fit into a room. However, This individual was very intelligent and often scored near perfect on exams. They wanted to go to med school. What made this person troublesome? Every detail was a small battle they had to win. They would bring articles how one small minor detail was incorrectly taught. 1 point off on an exam was met with highlighted notes from the book, PowerPoint, and articles on how they were correct. Mind you, the score on the exam was 99%. Karma justice, did not get into medical school. One school emailed the pre-professional guidance counselor and told them how much of an ass this individual was during the interview. Not a teacher. But one time when I was in kindergarten, a kid looked me straight in the eyes, bit himself on the wrist, hard, and ran to the teacher and blamed me. That little cunt. They sent me to the principal's office. My mom was called down. I got yelled at and cried. A week later, the kid did it again. And the teacher saw him do it. Felt so good to have the principal apologizing profusely to me, while that little idiot got a mouthful from his parents. I teach college students to be teachers. My first year doing this, I had a student who was always late. Turned in the bare minimum of work. Always had excuses. I told him he had to improve because if he did this on the job, he'd get fired. He kept coasting and the other profs let him get by. First teaching job, he got fired. I laughed in the privacy of my office, and I'm not sorry. I was a camp counselor, and there was this kid who was so annoying and always tried to borrow money from other campers and not give it back. Eventually, none of the campers wanted to play with him, including his only friend at camp. They came to me and I had to tell him why his friend didn't want to play with him anymore. I encouraged him to stop scheming. He didn't learn. But I think social exclusion is enough of a punishment for him. I had a student that was a real twerp. Always doing things he was not supposed to and purposely causing conflict with other students. He was a daily headache. One day in class he stole a candied pepper from one of Hispanic students and ate it. It was a very hot pepper, not sure of the type. At first I didn't notice cause he is a sneaky kid. He started to sweat and his sweat turned to tears. I need to go to the bathroom, he cried. My mouth. My mouth. I went to investigate and found out what happened. The karma payback plan was now collecting. And I refused to let him go get a drink and continued with the math instruction in hopes of teaching him a lesson. For the next few minutes he pleaded with me to go to the nurse with tears running down his face. I said I do not negotiate with thieves. He started running around in circles. It wasn't until he started sobbing and crying out I just want my mom, that I finally felt bad and said, if I take you to the nurse are you ever going to act out in class again? He promised that he wouldn't. And he never did. The tears and sobbing in front of his peers broke his ego and he was a stellar student for the rest of the school year. I teach middle school. A student would frequently verbally abuse me and I was really patient with him. He had some troubles with school in general. So I was just another cog. I still did my best to check in with him and help him out with homework. His parents weren't really responsive because he was a senior and could therefore make his own decisions. One day he flipped out at me and walked out of the classroom. I sincerely had no idea what I did. He'd gone straight to the dean and told her that I gave him a look. The dean knows who I am and what I'm like and what I've done for this student, so she, as she told me later, told him to cut the bullet and be nice to me because I didn't deserve his abuse. He admitted to her that he just wanted to pick a fight and he was impressed at how cool I kept myself when he started yelling "duck you" at me in front of the class. He was nice to me for the rest of the trimester and passed the class with a D+ after having failed it the year prior. I was happy to see him at graduation. I guess my best revenge for this student's abuse was getting him to become a bit more grown up and civil. He deserved it. Had a kid that threw a lock at my head not get expelled because it just slipped out of her hand. She got expelled a few months later for bringing a weapon to school. In high school we had this little kid named Brandon. I only had one class with him, but that class is where the story happened. It was 11th grade geography. And our teacher was one of the nicer teachers I can remember. Brandon would always push her buttons like I'm sure he did to everyone. He would never take it too far. I think he just loved the attention of getting the whole class to look at him or laugh at what he was doing. He would make little noises, tell stupid jokes during lecture, pretend to sleep and snore, and any other stupid irritating act that you could think of. Our teacher. She was quite a patient lady, but you could tell by mid-year that she had enough of his it as anyone. She couldn't even really punish him because Brandon loved that kind of attention and it made him all the happier. The few times he got too much, she would give him detention and a couple times sent him to the office, which just made him more giddy. We had a very tame office staff and they would keep him in the office for an hour or something and just let him out. She tried everything and you could tell she was at the end of her wits. A few weeks after 9/11, some kid thought it would be funny to call in a bomb threat. They cleared the school and went locker by locker. They found nothing, of course. And we went back in. As soon as we sat down in that geography class, an office staff member came into our class and went up to our teacher and whispered something into her ear. I still remember the calm look on her face. In the most professional way, she looked over at Brandon and said, "You're being called to the office." She went on with the rest of the class completely normal. They had found quite a bit of weed in Brandon's locker and as a result he was expelled over it. Had a student who would routinely get his cell phone out and wouldn't put it away when asked. Often left the room during class. Karmic justice. Failed the course. Not a teacher, but in 3rd grade. There was this kid who nobody really liked because when he got in trouble, the whole class would get in trouble. I didn't like the kid. I thought he was annoying and I never really learned anything but to not misbehave because I could also get in trouble like him. Anyway, one day he started giving the other kids in the class $1 bills to be friends with him. All of the boys were like, hell yeah, I'll be your friend for $1. Capital I. On the other hand, thought too highly of myself and refused. Then, the teacher stormed into the room, looked straight at him and demanded that he gives back the money. Apparently, he stole it from the teacher. All of the boys who he gave the money to got detention. The kid got expelled. When I was younger, the teacher got tired of the kid who kept disrupting the class and she gave extra homework to everyone in the class except the troublesome kid and made all the students write thanks for the extra homework. Name. Somehow he stopped believing he was cool after that. Straight from the drill sergeant's playbook. That one. Yep. Stopped the trouble student by peer pressure and stopped the class from encouraging his antics. Didn't like it at the time but was effective as hell. I teach kindergarten. And I had a terrible child in my class last year. He liked to pull his desk away from the girl sitting across from him so her pencils and crayons would go falling on the floor. Finally, one day she got fed up and slammed her desk back into his. Unfortunately for him, his fingers happened to be there. I had to resist the urge to be like, that's what you get, but instead I just reminded him that that's why I said not to move his desk away from the rest of the table and sent him to the nurse. Oh, I know how bad that hurts. Good for you for not punishing the girl for dishing out some karma. Me and the girl had a talk about being aware of your surroundings when moving the furniture. And she gave him a half-hearted sorry. All that was needed. This douchy kid grabbed a girl's purse and started rifling through it one day. Then he started yelling that she had a knife in her bag, trying to get her in trouble. I believe the sub said something along the lines of, and that's why she has a knife, and gave the kid detention. After that he stayed away from the poor girl. I was in pre-K in the early 80s at a private Catholic school. This one kid, Amy, would always bite the other kids. I don't remember exactly how it went down, but I guess one day I came home crying or had a really bad bite mark or something and my mom was pissed. She took me straight to the superintendent, not the principal, and showed her what happened. The superintendent, a really old nun, did not put up with that it. She called Amy into her office and bit the duck out of her arm. Amy started crying, but she never bit anyone again. Old nuns in the 80s were hardcore. Note, I am not saying what happened was right, just that it happened. I was teaching music. I had a flutist who was fantastic. He practiced 4 hours every day and wanted to be the next James Galway, guy who does the fluty Shire theme in The Lord of the Rings. Unfortunately, he had an ego the size of Texas. He told the girl next to him, who also wanted to be a professional flutist, that she was abysmal and should just go kill herself. He refused to audition for our local honor band, which was part of his grade, because he refused to lower himself to playing with such talentless musicians. He would bitch about my conducting in class when I wouldn't cue him because I was too busy cueing the low brass who needed help with their entrances, aka teaching. He refused to play a theme from a popular video game at a concert, something that we play to get people to attend because we need that money to keep the program going. It was apparently not artistic enough. Then he refused to show up to a concert because he was embarrassed to be seen performing with his high school band. So he failed band and I kicked that toxic little id out. But he was talented and he wanted to be a flutist. So he auditioned for Juilliard and made it in. This ducker quits before the first semester is over because he believed he was more talented than his teachers. He earned a symphony gig in a very well-known group thanks to a blind audition where he wasn't permitted to talk and reveal how much of a douchebag he was. That lasted 2 weeks before he dissed the very famous conductor's conducting and got his ass fired. His career is dead because he couldn't keep his ego in check. And I find it immensely satisfying. I used to get in trouble in my 3rd grade a lot because I would lose my pencil in class. My teacher, Mrs. Hodges, must have thought I was a moron. One day, after yet another lost pencil, I glance over at little Miss Anita closing her pencil box and glimpse my pencil in there. I screamed bloody murder at her until my teacher came over to yell at me for disrupting class. I accused Anita, who broke down crying and admitted it. Teacher took her out of class to deal with the situation. As far as I can tell, Anita was not punished, but she never stole any of my pencils again. Capital I, however, did not get an apology from either lady. I think Mrs. Hodges was pissed that she had one less reason to hate me. Looking back, I think Anita was poor and therefore got a pass. Not teacher, but I'll tell you a story anyway. There was this guy in middle school that would take it and piss in the hallways really weird, but he somehow thought it was funny so he kept doing it. Well, I was locker buddies with this really early developed guy in middle school. He was like Hagrid big to me back then. I noticed the weird kid standing next to my locker but standing in front of Hagrid's locker. I'm thinking, oh, something's about to go down, so I waited. Hagrid gets to his locker and this kid was still standing in front of his locker. Hagrid tells him to please move out of the way because he was blocking the way. Weird kid says no and starts chuckling. All I'm thinking is oh it. Hagrid asks again and still the same response. This is when Hagrid ducking kicks this MF in the face. Like I've never seen anything like this before. This kid is standing straight up and he lifted his leg higher than I am in height and kicked this kid in the face. Hagrid gets suspended and tells me if that kid ever bothers me to let him know so he can kick him in the face again.